Well, hi, everybody. I'm Don Stewart, and welcome to our second edition of Breaking News of this Tuesday, the 8th day of April, 2025. And let us say at the outset, we are very happy with the information we've received in the last several hours regarding what we talked about earlier today about the negotiations that are going to take place in Oman on Saturday between the U.S. delegation and an Iranian delegation with mediators from Oman. What the U.S. has promised Israel, which Netanyahu's made very clear what will be acceptable and what's not. And it seems the U.S. and Israel are on board together on this. And if this is the case, and if the promises we see are true, the ones that have been made, the ones that have been, revealed the last couple of hours, then we feel very, very good about this situation. We can breathe a sigh of relief. Now, let's look at these stories. We have three important stories, two about Iran, U.S., and Israel, and the third about the Temple Mount. So some fascinating stories. So let's get to them. First headline, Netanyahu says Iran could agree to a U.S. nuclear deal, but under one condition. We'll see what that is. U.S. to Netanyahu, Iran talks won't repeat the 2015 nuclear agreement, which is great news. A very important thing that they mentioned in that by emphasizing that. And then finally, Hamas fears sacrifices will be made on the Temple Mount, which is a really interesting story right now. All right, let's look at these and see what's going on because it's very important we pick up where we left off, but then we have so much more information than we had earlier, some positive information rather than the negative things we had previously. Netanyahu, Iran can agree to a U.S. nuclear deal, but under one condition. This is from the Jerusalem Post. Netanyahu said Iran's denuclearization could be achieved by two routes, either through an agreement or militarily. Following his meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump, Prime Minister Netanyahu said on Tuesday that Iran must not have nuclear weapons, adding that this could be achieved by two routes, either diplomatically or militarily. He added any deal that they're talking about would only be acceptable if it were similar to the one that Libya did in the early 2000s. Now, we have mentioned that briefly. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But basically, the Libya agreement is this, and here's what Netanyahu suggests. We go in, blow up the facilities, and dismantle all the equipment under American supervision and execution. That's the ideal scenario. The second option, which we don't want, is that they'll simply drag out the negotiations, and in that case, the military option becomes the only choice. However, and here's important, a number of stories have indicated this, Iran would be allowed to maintain a civilian nuclear program for electricity generation, such as the Bushehr reactor, even if it must completely dismantle its current nuclear program, including the facilities housing the centrifuges and enabling uranium enrichment. In other words, everything must be dismantled that has anything to do with building a weapon beyond what would be normal use of the nuclear power. They'll allow that for electricity and generation for the people of Iran. They won't take that away from them. But anything having remotely to do with nuclear construction of a bomb with enriching uranium to weapons grade, that will all be dismantled and destroyed. Now, a source familiar with the details of the discussion told the Jerusalem Post, Trump said Iran will not have nuclear weapons. Military nuclear facilities, no. Civilian nuclear, yes. So they will have that. So this has been a story that's been finally revealed a little bit more today. So it's good to understand that. Now, Netanyahu spoke at length about the Libyan model during the meeting with Trump, an Israeli source told the Post. And so the Libyan model, again, just so we understand, refers to an agreement under which Libya dismantled its nuclear program in the early 2000s, during which facilities and structures related to the program were also dismantled. Israeli sources told the Post that the chances of the Iranians agreeing to a nuclear deal based on the Libyan model are low. No, we think they're non-existent. All right. The sources further noted the impression is that Trump is serious about his threats, meaning if there's no agreement, he will act against the nuclear program with military means. And that's what's the consistent message that he and all his, staff are saying. The surrogates, Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, and others have made this very, very clear. Now, Elliot Abrams, he was Trump's special envoy to Iran during his first term. And this is interesting what he said. He told the Jerusalem Post, if Trump is also serious about the possibility of bombing Iran, then it's useful to have a negotiation. Go through it, watch it fail. So that's your explanation of why you had to use military force. And that makes a lot of sense. In other words, he's going to cover all his bases, say, look, we gave him a chance. We told him they got to dismantle their program. There's no way we're going to allow you to have a bomb because we know what you're going to try and do with it, destroy Israel and also destroy us. That's not going to happen. And if they don't agree to that, they don't dismantle their program, then military force will be the final answer here. All right, the Libyan model. Now, it also said it should be noted that Trump maintains ambiguity regarding what he will demand from the Iranians and how far he's willing to go. He just said this: if the talks fail, Iran will be in great danger, he said. And Elliot Abrams said, we need them to agree to stop supporting terrorist proxies, and we need to control the missile program. If that's the U.S. position, and I think Iran will not agree to it, then the talks will fail. And we're going to find out that indeed is the U.S. position, that it's not going to be just the nuclear program, it's their missile program too that will also be having to be neutralized. So, bottom line is there's only two options on the table as far as these negotiations are concerned: dismantle or be attacked. You have no third choice. Now, the next headline is a very necessary clarification of the U.S. position. The U.S. said to Netanyahu, Iran talks won't repeat the 2015 nuclear agreement. Iran's deteriorating economic situation is undoubtedly one of the reasons for Iranian capitulation on agreeing to negotiations with the U.S., alongside with the belief that Iran will possibly, and again, like we talked about earlier, buy time, talk, stall, stall, stall. And so trying to, wait as long as they can to develop something that could at least try and attempt to send to Israel some type of nuclear weapon. That doesn't look like that's going to happen now. Now, according to international sources, and here again, which is also fascinating, Iran refused to include its missile project and support for terrorist organization in the region within the negotiating framework. In other words, we're not going to talk about our missile program. We're not going to about our support with, the Houthis, with Hezbollah, with Hamas. That's not on the table. The Americans made it clear to Netanyahu these issues would be indeed on the table. So that's great if America will argue from that way and negotiate from that string. Now, there's another clarification that's even more important. The agreement will not be a reproduction of the 2015 agreement, but it is intended for complete elimination of Iran's nuclear program and real oversight of its implementation. In 2015, they had a thing called the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which Obama did an end run around the United States Senate, went to the UN Security Council and got it instituted. Um, Basically, it was a freeze of the nuclear program of Iran, not a destruction of or dismantling of it. It was a freeze, and they had to comply. And in 10 years, which this is the 10th year, 2025, the sunset clause would kick in, and Iran could develop, nuclear material if they, behave, which they didn't. But there was really no real looking at the program. Iran hid what they were doing. There was no openness about it. So the so-called freeze didn't work. Now, here's what the Americans are saying. No, 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 not this time. This is not a freeze of the program. This is a destruction, a dismantling of the program. And we're going to make sure this has been dismantled. In other words, complete elimination and real oversight of this implementation. That's something that wasn't there before under Obama. It also clarified that Israel would be informed about the contacts and conversations and would be able to convey its position to the American negotiators. Now, this is interesting. It should be noted that in the previous negotiations 10 years ago, United States President Barack Obama excluded Israel from the talks. He wouldn't allow Israel in the talks. Now, if the U.S. sticks to these promises and the days of Iran's nuclear program are numbered, one way or another, it must be neutralized, as we said, according to the Bible, when Israel was eventually invaded by Russia and other countries, including Iran and Turkey. They will feel at peace. They will feel safe. They will not feel any threat from the south, Hamas in the north, or Hezbollah. These people will be just a memory, not even a fond memory, but a memory, because they will be caught totally surprised because they think they're secure. And it'll be the third time that's happened in their history. Yom Kippur War in 1973. 2023, 50 years and one day later with Hamas, October 7th, going in and attacking and murdering all those civilians there in Israel. And it'll happen again in the future. Ezekiel 38 is very clear. They're feeling secure at the time when they will be invaded. So what does that mean? It means security has to be there, at least for a while, for Israel, including its south, including its north. And remember again, it is not Iran which will be leading the charge. It will be Russia. Iran will be there as a surrogate, as part of it. But again, it won't be the leader of the pack, as it were. So we will see. Okay. Headline number three. Interesting headline. Hamas feels sacrifices on the Temple Mount. Hamas channels are warning that Israelis are attempting to offer the Passover lamb on the Temple Mount as a prelude to Israel attempting to replace the mosque with the third temple. All right. Official media channels of Hamas have disseminated claims that the holdings of Jewish worship ceremonies on the Temple Mount constitute a desecration of the Aqsa Mosque compound. In a message published on the organization's Telegram channel, it was stated that the entire Temple Mount, according to Islamic belief, is considered an inseparable part of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and therefore any Jewish action in the place, especially sacrifices, is considered a severe violation of the site's sanctity. Now, this is nonsense. I first got into this whole situation about the Temple Mount on a trip to Israel in 1982. There was a expedition we did in 1983 to try and find the exact location of the temple using the latest scientific equipment. At the time, we weren't allowed to do it. We were kind of close, but didn't do it. But the point was, at that particular time, the only sacred part of the Temple Mount was the Al-Aqsa Mosque, that gray building. It's the very southern side of the mount. It is not the Dome of the Rock shrine. That is a shrine. It has never been considered holy. It's not a mosque. It's just a shrine that was made. So even though it's the glistening dome, the whole Temple Mount, the only thing of any real worship or value was the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Now, over the years, it's changed. Islam decided to say, well, the top of the mount's now part of the mosque, part of the compound, and then the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall, they even made that part of it too. So everything now is holy and sacred to Islam. And so Israel needs to keep their hands off of it. Again, this was not the case earlier in the early 80s and 90s. I think it was something like 2003 they came up with this. Anyway, so it's not an inseparable part of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And well, it has been recently, but that's all new because Israel is getting closer and closer, they believe, of building a third temple. Now, it also stated that other Jewish ceremonies performed in the past, including the blowing of the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, kneeling and prostrating on the floor, and bringing religious articles into the compound, all represent, according to Hamas, deliberate steps to change the status quo. And the status quo can simply be explained by this. In 1967, when the Temple Mount was liberated by the Israelis, Israel lifted the Magen David, the Star of David, there on the Dome of the Rock. They flew the flag there. And it looked like there would be a third temple that would be built there. However, 10 days later, Moshe Dayan, who was then the defense minister, met with the Muslim high command and gave the authority of the custodianship back to Islam. So the top of the Temple Mount, where the Dome of the Rock stands, where the Al-Aqsa Mosque stands, is now and has been, continues to be under Islamic control. The Western Wall, the Wailing Wall, which is not a sacred site at all. It was only King Herod doubled the size of the Temple Mount. When he built we extended the second temple, it further beautified it. And in doing so, in doubling the size of the mount, he built a retaining wall on the western side, and that's the Wailing Wall, the Western Wall. There's nothing sacred about it, but it's where the Jews worship today, and the Muslims, of course, worship on top of the Temple Mount. And so there's been no sacrifice. There's been no allowing of prayer on the Temple Mount for Jews or Christians. And this has been a sore spot since Diane made that in 1967, that ruling. And even though there's supposed to be freedom of worship everywhere in Israel, the Temple Mount is the one exception. Now, Hamas claims that the sacrificing and offering on the Temple Mount, even symbolically, would conceptually turn the Al-Aqsa Mosque into a temple, thus paving the way for the practical implementation of a plan to build the third temple. According to the organization's announcement, the initial stages of this plan would include the division of areas of use of the Temple Mount, similar to the arrangement in the Cave of the Patriarchs, and afterwards, they claim, construction of the temple would itself begin. In the Cave of the Patriarchs, you've got it divided there in Hebron, where parts Islamic and parts Israeli. And so they say this is what the next thing they're going to do. They want to divide part of the temple for Israel's use and then eventually build a temple on somewhere on the mountain, the part that belongs to them. Now, here's bottom line. A third temple will indeed be built as predicted in Scripture. While construction will eventually begin, the exact time is something that nobody knows about. Now, the importance of the temple cannot be overestimated. As we always say, Israel is God's timepiece. The nation is the hour hand. The city of Jerusalem is the minute hand, but the Temple Mount is the second hand because on that mountain, at some time in the future, events will take place that'll start the countdown. 1,290 days, the second coming of Jesus Christ to the earth, when the sacrifices that are restored someday in a rebuilt temple, the temple will be built someday. Sacrifices will begin, continue. We don't know for how long, but there will be stopped. And they'll be stopped by the final Antichrist, where he will declare war on the Jews. He will force the world to worship him. He will claim to be God. He will sit in the temple and claim to be God himself. Now, all of this is documented in two of our books. First 25 signs, we're near the end. Sign 8, preparations are being made to build a third temple, and they have been made for 25, 30 years now. Although you can't do anything, you got the preparations because the real estate's still under Islamic control. And then we have a book that fully goes into it called The Jews, Jerusalem, and the Coming Temple. Goes into great detail about every issue with respect to the temple, past, present, and future that you need to know about it. So please take advantage of these resources. They're on our website, Educating Our World. And as always, with everything we do, everything's free. There's no charge, no cost. So please take advantage of it. So some wild, wild stories today. But let me tell you, I feel so much better with the U.S. clarifying what these negotiations are going to be all about. With Netanyahu saying, yeah, we'll allow negotiations under one proviso, and that is the whole program there of the nuclear weapons. The facilities will be basically eliminated. They'll be dismantled under supervision, so there won't be any possibility of Iran building a nuclear weapon, and with its missile system too, not having it to have the ability to shoot a missile to Israel or to the United States as they eventually would like to do. So almost feel like exhale now because it didn't look really good earlier with what Trump had said, but once the clarifications come in, feeling a whole lot better. Now, we trust this will all turn out this way. There won't be any problem that's thrown into all this. Of course, as everybody says, Iran will kick and scream and say this is, not humanitarian to take away our nuclear power. No, they're not taking away your nuclear power. Your electricity you'll still have. They're going to take away your nuclear facilities to build a weapon to try and destroy Israel is what they're going to do. So we will see. It's going to be interesting to see. But again, feel a lot better this afternoon than we did this morning after the initial response of yesterday. All right, I'm Don Stewart. Thank you so much for watching. And until next time, as always, thank you. And may the Lord bless you richly, richly bless you.